I am Jeffrey Nagy.
I'm Pearl Hubert.
I'm Akita Ivanovsky.
I'm Liam Campbell.
I'm Joshua Persons, and we are the Wolf Pack. Wolf Pack, Wolf Pack, 1, 2, 3.
We're the team that everyone
Everyone
needs.
needs.
And today we are going to be discussing groups as open systems.
In order for groups to succeed as open systems, we always have to put aside our differences and put aside any judgments that we might carry with us in order to work together efficiently.
And just like the rest of our lives, we're always trying to learn and further our education. So we must argue for important information.
And while doing so, that we respect each other's backgrounds, as each member has their own individual factor of their values, beliefs, environments, and what is shaped throughout the group.
So the first thing that needs to be discussed before going fully into open systems, we need to discuss the theory of general systems. So general systems covers basically any system, be they biological, political, or social. Political, such as judicial courts, executive, or so on and so forth. Biological, like systems of the body, or social systems, which is what we discuss, such as small groups or large groups. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I agree that the general systems theory does apply to all of this, and that I will say that before that group communication was hard to understand, but it's easier to understand it as a social system. That it's more complex than what it already is.
I like to relate general systems or groups in general back to the human body. So in the human body, we have tons of organs. Your skin, your heart, your brain, your innards, any part of your body there's a lot of organs in your body. And all those organs work towards the collective goal of keeping the body running. Your lungs breathe, obviously. Your heart beats, also obviously. They all have their own niche goal to themselves. They all contribute something different from each other, but at the same time contributing to the same goal.
I would actually like to hop in and add something. For an example, like how groups can be looked at as an organism, us as a group can be considered that, because each of us have our own slides that we will be leading and facilitating while this presentation goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
In a system, there are three important elements. However, the most important element is the throughput process. The throughput process takes an input and transforms it into an output. And there are many different types of throughput processes, such as what are the rules of the group, how is its leaders, how is conflict managed, and what are the roles of the group members. And throughout this, the most important element of throughput process is communication. And there are several examples of this, such as when you communicate to someone is taking that input and processing it to understand what you communicated. But also, another great way is creative thinking. Not creative thinking, critical thinking, taking a creative idea and discussing whether it's viable or not.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Communication is the central activity of this whole process, because you've got conflict or ideas for input. You talk them out, think them through as a group, and you reach a solution or outcome, and there's your output. So,
Hopping on this bandwagon of the throughput process, one thing that involves itself is the inputs and outputs. But that's the one thing that inputs and outputs can't live without, and that is the throughput process itself.
In the throughput process, it says that communication is the central activity for the transformative process. I would also argue that communication is one of the most important parts of life. Just to stress how important communication is in this, I have an example. If we were to take a regular piece of paper, write down front and on the back side, however, or every single form of communication that you take in one day. Everything. You can get as deep as you want. Then you take this paper and stack it and keep writing and keep stacking until you're done with the day. If you were to do all of that, the stacks would be 3 stories high, and there would be 3 of them. This was a study done at the communication division in Stanford semi-recently.
Well, inputs and outputs are integral. Inputs of questions from the throughput process kind of forces you to wonder how inputs and outputs can work without throughput processes, and that's because they can't. Because as long as each group system exists, a throughput process exists, and so does the inputs and outputs. So it's just one layer at a time.
Exactly. Funnily enough, next slide is input and output.
Yes. So while these are integral itself, as they should be, inputs have to be involved regardless, even if the output may not exist, which, spoiler alert, it has to exist. One can't live without the other. Inputs can be as simple as working on a task or asking a question, and the output can be as simple as the end goal of said task or the answer to that question. The thing about it is outputs can be tangible or intangible as long as the group can complete it. The one thing that can actually link inputs and outputs most of the time are these formats, where the throughput process is one of them, of course, then the feedback, which involves communication, the multiple clauses and paths, which involve individuals expressing their own inputs and creating their own outputs, and then synergy, where outputs are actually determined about that or from it. Because of these factors influencing the work and social aspect, these suggest interactions where it all links back toward their feedback. It involves direct communication. One of the examples I can actually use is when my friend was assigned to me in a group for a presentation. That presentation ended up working a lot more smoothly because not only was the environment a lot more accessible and less shaped up as the familiarity was there, the feedback itself was more than enough to increase our output.
Yeah, and I think another really good example of feedback for input and output is our group. I think our group naturally has a very good atmosphere for feedback. Like, for example, during the Brooklyn Bridge project, when we started out with a whole bunch of different ideas, we were really able to come together and give each other and each individual idea feedback to where we were able to narrow it down until we came up with our final product and our final idea. And that's where we got our output, our final project. And it worked out really well.
One of the things that the inputs and outputs segue into is feedback, because it's an unpredictable way of helping performance to the group, not individually, because it can't sum up those individual performances, but because of these inputs and outputs, the feedback greatly improves such a performance, and that's kind of one of those things. Now that we're kind of ending on feedback here, is there anyone else that could share their feedback?
Before we move on to feedback really quickly, I would like to interject about input and output. Input and output, I have one final example for it, and then we can move on. Input, I like the human body. It's a very amazing thing to me that evolution has caused it to happen. And one of the ways that we can look at input and output is through the human body. This being by form of nutrition and your surroundings and anything that you have. If you eat healthy food, then the output will be that your body gets healthier and you feel better. You get those chemicals released by your brain to tell your body that, hey, it's doing okay. But on the flip side, you can also make the analogy that if you put in junk food, then the inverse would happen. And then, after you have the input and the output, as you guys have covered a bit already, we have the feedback.
Now, I do agree with Makita about the definition of feedback, and that all that feedback is just taking the output of the system and inputting it back in as an input. And it's really important for a group to have feedback as it monitors the progress of the group and allows for the spotting of errors. And but the type of feedback and the source of the feedback is also really important too. Like, for example, is this feedback coming from, say, like your boss? Is it coming from your manager? Or is it coming from like one of your group members, your coworkers? But the type of feedback too is important, such as is it positive feedback saying like, hey, this is great work, let's keep going on? Or is it negative feedback saying like, hey, I spotted this and I think that we need to fix it? And as long as it's constructive feedback, such as negative feedback like that, the group can go on to do really well. And I think a really great example of this is from the Fantastic Four when Johnny Storm goes into the prototype machine to reverse his powers, and they end up learning that he can go supernova and that he shouldn't, so that he doesn't destroy the Earth.
Yeah, and I think another good example, or well, not a good example, a good point to make about feedback is that it is an integral part about learning, and that when you receive feedback from someone, as long as you're comfortable with the person you're receiving feedback from, that you don't take it as a negative, but you learn from it, because it's an important part of learning. So if you're at a job that you just got hired at and you're learning the cash register or something like that, and your manager says, hey, you're doing this wrong and we need to do it this way, you don't get so hard and down on yourself, but you just take that feedback and you change your ways and you do it the correct way and learn from your mistakes instead of continuing in the wrong.
Exactly. One of my favorite types of feedback is criticism. Be it, my favorite way is, excuse me, my favorite personal form of criticism is constructive criticism. Makes you feel good and you learn something. That is when we put input into a system, the output comes out, and then we look at the feedback and we see, okay, what can we start doing because it'll help us? What can we stop doing because it's not going to help us? And what are we going to continue doing because it's going to continue helping us? The constructive criticism can then be used as a learning tool in tandem with the rest of the feedback from whatever you're doing to help you progress as a group or an individual.
I would like to chime in. Knowing that feedback is now partially constructive criticism on that end, I wonder if you can use feedback on yourselves as, your own form of self-criticism.
Yes, you can. It's just like Makita said, just self-criticizing yourself and also correcting yourself, seeing the mistakes that you've done.
All right.
I know it's commonly commonly also said that you are your own worst critic. You'll notice things that you don't normally do. If I'm giving a presentation to 200 people at a university and I slip up on a pronunciation of a word, then I will notice it, definitely, because you are your own worst critic. Some of the audience members may not be listening at that moment, so they may miss it. But when you are doing something, the best pair of eyes that you have for yourself is already in your own body.
Totally. I agree. All right. The next thing that we want to talk about is bona fide group perspective, which talks a lot about the environment in which group members come from. And the environment is talking about where the surroundings or the conditions in which each individuals operate. This relates to the relationship between the group members and their environment and how that is going to shape the group and how it operates together. Would anyone like to share how their environment is affecting our group or past groups?
I'd love to share. Personally, I staff summer camps quite a bit. I've been doing it for a couple, 2 or 3 years. In one of the years we had, since the summer camp operates on well water, it has to be cleansed every once in a while so that any impurities get in there, then it's not harmful water. When we cleanse it, we use a precise amount of a certain chemical to neutralize the water without ruining the taste. Well, one year, the people that were in charge of that accidentally dumped 5 times the amount of chemical into the water than they were supposed to. So for the entire week, the entire group of campers, staff, and maintenance staff all alike tasted like we were drinking chlorine water. It wasn't the healthiest for us. Obviously, it didn't kill it, me at least. Nobody died, and we got through it. But it definitely changed the attitude of some of the individuals. It's not really the best situation to go around drinking pool water the entire week.
I would like to hop in. I'm sorry that you've had that situation with your campers, but I do have a question now that I think about it when different things happen. What if everyone in the group member is different? What happens then? Does the group just fall apart immediately?
No, I think it's important in a group where all of the members are different. I think that's most common because you're not going to find a group of people that are exactly alike, that you find someone with natural leadership skills, or a leader tends to arise and they find common ground and they're able to bond you guys together and make sure everyone feels welcomed and make sure everyone feels that they are able to speak and not feel judged or anything like that.
Well, knowing that different people can work together now, what about people who already do work together now? When people who previously established a good group environment crashes, what happens then? Is it possible to rebuild the environment or shape it up again?
Yeah, yes, it is. It is possible for the environment to be shaped up by the group and be rebuilt, or for the group to change to a new environment. Humans are very adaptable, and we will adapt to survive. And I think that brings us on to our next point. Interdependence is each person of the group is interdependent from each other and come together to form a group.
Yeah, perfect. So for interdependence, we have to remember that we are all our own person, and we all have our own quirks, ifs, ands, and buts around us. We are all independent parts of a system. We all can influence, and we are all influenced by the systems that we participate in. And one person can bring down the entire group. Now, I'm not saying that there is always one person. Some groups are perfect. Some groups have all the people that are just meh. I like to look at this example in the terms of a stone bridge, one of those big arching ones. Tons in olden day Rome. You can even see some of them nowadays. They're very common in Ireland. They're all over the place. In these stone arches, there's one stone in the middle. That stone is called the keystone. If the keystone is removed, the entire bridge collapses. That stone is holding up nearly all of the weight of both of the sides of the bridge, pressing inwards. If that one piece removes, it starts to crumble and go down until it just dissolves. That keystone right here is any one of us. If we have something happen in our life, like let's say I had a family emergency and I had to leave this group, in that moment I am the keystone. And in that moment I am leaving. This could cause the bridge to crumble. However, bridges are able to get fixed. Someone could come in. A leader could arise into the spot, or somebody could fill whatever I was doing. and B, that new keystone that's holding up the bridge. Would anyone like to share?
Yes, I would. Similar to you, Liam, I have been a part of Boy Scout summer camps for at least 4 years, and 3 different camps actually. And typically, each member of staff has to uphold the example required for the camp. We have to follow a certain code, a certain dress. I have to follow a certain set of principles to make sure that the camp is safe and clean and ready for each week of campers. And if one person steps out of line or does something that will reflect poorly on the rest of the staff and the camp as a whole. And also, each staff member is typically part of a different group, like handicrafts, aquatics, land staff, so on and so forth. And if one person isn't able to make it to their area, for example, if they fall sick, they might have to go without teaching a certain merit badger skill for that week.
Perfect.
So,
I'd like to. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how we have interdependence in the Boy Scout summer camps.
Perfect. I'd like to tag on and kind of ask anybody a question that may answer. When we relate back to a topic that we've already covered of feedback, or inputs and outputs, any of that whole clump that we covered, let's say we already have our summer camp or our previous group or our friends that we play video games with. We have our team. What happens when bad input comes into the system? Who do we rely on?
Well, usually a bad input would come out of it, and you would have to rely on a leader who would, try to set things right or create a better synergy.
Perfect. And using certain problem-solving skills that we've learned along the way, we can either, if that leader goes away or something happens to that leader, we can use our problem-solving skills to fill the slot, pick up the slack, and help each other out.
And since people can influence each other to become leaders themselves due to situations like these, it brings up a question for me. If influences can influence themselves, like how members influence each other most of the time, doesn't that create a butterfly effect?
Perfect.
Yes. Yes, it does. Because each member of the group is able to influence other members of the group and be influenced by the other members while also interacting with the environment, which also influences the group too.
Exactly. Just like the game of dominoes that we used to play when we were kids. We knock down one domino and a whole bunch of other dominoes fall. Now there are many...
Cards.
Exactly, House of Cards. There's many different ways and many different paths that you guys, or that we can all look at interdependence and problem solving on. And that brings us to our next topic of multiple causes, multiple paths.
Okay, so I want to take a brief moment, step away from the group for just a second. There are a lot of examples of multiple causes, multiple paths in the world, and you most obviously see them in video games or tabletop games like Fallout New Vegas, Until Dawn, and of course Dungeons and Dragons. Until Dawn is probably a very, very good example of this because of its use of the butterfly effect, interacting with many of the characters, and the choices you make can alter the way the game goes, and pretty much no one person will play the same. And this is very similar to how it works in groups. Not all people are the same. Many people have different experiences or different ways of thinking things through, and oftentimes they have different reasons for joining into a group. So usually there's more than one right way to do anything based on any suggestion that each person gives. Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to add on to that sometimes I feel that most groups don't understand that that they just focus on like the single cause, like say that they fail a presentation, that they say that this person didn't do their work or so and so. However, the group also has to realize that they may not have taken the right path or the best path.
Presentation. Recording.
For the multiple causes and multiple paths that we can look at, I think another tool that we can also use is the tool of brainstorming as an example for this. In brainstorming, the whole process of the group and the whole reason for the brainstorming to actually happen is to just chuck out as many ideas as possible. Then, as they get limited down and kind of slimmed down into however many you may need, be it one, be it more than one, then the group can focus more on getting those tasks done. Now, to get those tasks done, the most efficient way is to have proper synergy. For synergy, this is the end goal. This is what we want to reach in the end, to have perfect synergy and everybody to be happy-dunky with it. Members make the group unique. As we've said multiple times, each member of the group is their own person and they bring their own unique thing to the table. I am good at things that Makita is not, and Makita is great at things that I am not. There are many different examples that we can look at this throughout our group, throughout your group, throughout anyone's group. And in input and output, this helps, or this doesn't help, but this relates to synergy perfectly because it directly affects the synergy. The output being a better synergy or a worse synergy. If you put in better input, you get better output. Put in worse input, you get worse output. Would anyone like to share?
Yes, I would like to interject that I do not feel that the output or that the input matters. If the group is synergizing well and working with each other and understanding each other, that it doesn't matter how bad the output is. If they can take whatever input that they have, whether it's like they have limited resources, if they have low money, that they can take those resources that they have, those inputs, and they can create a much superior output than what was given to them because that they synergize well and work together.
Hearing that inputs can technically be ignored, does that mean synergy can replace inputs?
No, it cannot.
All right, then. But now this brings up another question for me that was brought up back ago about brainstorming. Considering that the ideas can be used as inputs to create solutions, what about groupthink? Is it supposed to limit or raise ideas?
Groupthink happens when, as a byproduct of improper use of synergy, I feel. Synergy can be pointed in a very useful direction if all members contribute and we all come to a common goal and we come to a understanding of where we want to head. Groupthink, I feel, is just follow. There's the story of the Pied Piper and all the lemmings. We don't want the groupthink of the lemmings. They had improper synergy and they had groupthink go on, and now all of the lemmings go down in history as that story.
So they cause limited solutions or limited outputs, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I would like to add to the talk of groupthink that it is very important that the group not go into groupthink, because there have been many disasters because of groupthink, especially if I remember the deadliest air disaster ever because of groupthink, because none of the crew members would stand up to the seniority of the captain.
Perfect. Exactly. Would anyone else like to share a final thought?
Well, a good example of synergy is from the Fantastic Four movie that we watched, that all of the different characters all have different aspects and different powers, and they all come from different backgrounds. They all have different environments that they all are functioning within. And even Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Woman, they have history together and they don't necessarily get along in the beginning. And the Rockman and Johnny Storm don't get along, but by the end of it, they have figured out how to synergize and how to work together and be able to problem solve and critically think and destroy Doctor Doom. And so that's just an important thing, that they have avoided groupthink and have just been able to learn how to work together.
Perfect. Great example. Thank you. If no final thoughts, then I would like to instead synergize our discussion into the conclusion. Jeffrey, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Liam. In conclusion, the throughput process is the most important element in the system. Well, sorry, is the most important element in the system, and of this, communication is key to this transformative process. And also, which leads to the feedback, which is taking that output and putting it back into the system as input, and the feedback has to meet criteria. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is the negative hurting the group? Is it critical that it's helping the group solve problems and keep on track? And where is it coming from, such as your boss or a group member?
Yeah, and secondly, we always have to remember that everyone is coming from a different background and functioning under different environments. And so we have to always let down our guards and give up any judgments that we can have from one another in order to have a bona fide group perspective. That is a tongue twister.
Most definitely is. But now that I think about it, inputs and outputs, they might not be as important as throughput systems or a throughput process, but they're almost linked between many other systems and processes, kind of like an organ. Like, think of it like a vein. It stretches throughout your body. It kind of functions like a nervous system. It can go through communications. It can also affect resources. It also affects how members can actually work together in synergy. But that's kind of one of the main things. Inputs and outputs can be as simple as a question to an answer. And that's kind of what I've been doing with my group. I've been inputting questions, and they've been outputting answers.
Perfect example. I know personally I don't really like to have a ranking system on which ones I prefer, or which systems I prefer more. Goodness, on which systems I prefer over others. I prefer all of them to work with synergy using the tools that interdependence gives us. They all rely on each other, just like that Keystone example. Without one, the rest of them don't really have anything to do. They don't have a reason for doing it. Without the output, then why put in an input? There's nothing that doesn't relate back to interdependence and back to synergy, because that's what makes the train keep chugging.
And everyone who joins into a group likely has different backgrounds and different things that they can bring to the table. Some are more motivated by experience. Others are able to understand the things that they learn better than others, and each provides a different cause to lead to, and provide different solutions or different options that can provide an opportunity for synergy.
Exactly. Well, thank you all for listening in on our discussion. We have been the Wolf Pack. And don't forget to submit your part into our discussion board. And once again, thank you.
Thank
you all.
you.
We'll see you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye.